Okay, so we all have those things, those things in our lives that we're maybe a little too devoted to, right? Like a favorite band or a brand of coffee, maybe even a sports team.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But but what if we kind of took that idea of like worship and we applied it to something way bigger, like society itself?
That's a good one.
Yeah, it sounds kind of out there. I know. I know, but that's exactly what we're going to unpack in this deep dive.
I love it.
We've got some really fascinating sources that explore this whole concept of like society as God. And they draw some really interesting parallels between traditional religions and how societies actually function. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think, instead of thinking of society as just sort of the background of our lives, we're going to look at it almost as a powerful force, something that really shapes our values and our behaviors and even our sense of purpose. It might surprise you.
For sure, for sure. And I think a lot of us have an intuitive sense of this already, right? But these sources, they take it to a whole new level.
They do.
Get ready for some serious food for thought. We'll be looking at things like societal rewards and punishments and cultural norms, and even how beliefs evolve over time, all through this lens of society as God.
That's right. And we'll also touch on some of the great thinkers who've grappled with these ideas, like Emil Durkheim and Friedrich Nietzsche. Their work really helps us to understand that relationship between the individual and the collective and how that dynamic has changed over time.
Right, so let's just dive right in. One of the first things that really struck me in these sources was this idea of society as a guiding force. It's like just as a deity might lay down the law in a religious context, society also provides a framework for, what's considered right and wrong, good and bad.
Absolutely. And that framework goes way beyond just written laws.
Right.
Think about all the unwritten rules, social codes, unspoken expectations that we all navigate every day. These are the subtle ways that society kind of guides our behavior, almost like a divine hand, shaping our choices.
Right, right. It's like that saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? But instead of just a city, it's the entire societal structure that we're talking about.
Exactly. And that's where the psychological aspect comes in.
Yeah.
We're just wired to want to fit in, to be accepted by the group. So we internalize these societal norms and expectations, often without even realizing it.
Right.
And that's how society exerts its influence, not through force, but through a kind of subtle persuasion.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's not just about avoiding punishment. It's about seeking those societal rewards too.
Right.
Like that feeling of belonging and status and recognition. It's almost like achieving a kind of societal heaven, when we live up to those expectations.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Because those rewards aren't necessarily material things, right? It's about social capital. It's that sense of worth and validation that comes from being, a valued member of the group.
Yeah, gotcha.
Different societies define these rewards differently, of course, but that underlying principle is the same. We're all striving for that sense of acceptance and belonging within our social context.
So then what happens when we don't conform? Is there like a societal hell waiting for those who stray from the path?
Well, there are definitely consequences for going against the grain, right?
Right.
It could be anything from social ostracism to legal penalties, depending on how serious the transgression is. But again, it's not always so black and white. Sometimes the punishment is more subtle, like a loss of status or social standing.
I see. So it's like society has this whole system of checks and balances in place to keep everyone more or less, in line, kind of like a deity overseeing, the moral order of the universe.
And that's what's so fascinating about this concept. It's not just about, drawing these superficial parallels. It's about understanding these deeper mechanisms at play. How does society, acting as a kind of God, how does it motivate and control behavior? What are the psychological levers that it pulls to shape our desires and aspirations?
And that's not even getting into the whole question of, morality and meaning. Does society actually dictate what makes a good life? Are we all just blindly following its script?
Well, that's a big question, and it's one that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
Right.
But it's clear that, society does play a significant role in shaping our values and our sense of purpose.
I think that's true.
Think about it. The goals that we're encouraged to pursue, the kind of life that's held up as the ideal, those messages are coming from the society we're embedded in.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's like society's constantly whispering in our ear, telling us what to strive for, what to fear, even what to believe in. But you mentioned some philosophers who've tackled this head on, right? Like who are some of the key figures who've explored this whole society as God concept?
One of the most influential thinkers in this area is Emil Durkheim.
Okay.
He was a sociologist who really delved into the relationship between religion and society. And his ideas are surprisingly relevant to what we're talking about today.
You mean his whole idea that religion is basically a reflection of society's power?
Exactly.
Wow.
Durkheim argued that what people are really worshiping in religion isn't some supernatural being,
Mm.
but the collective power and unity of society itself.
Wow.
He saw religion as a kind of social glue, a way of binding people together under a shared set of beliefs and values. And what's interesting is that even though he was specifically talking about religion, his ideas, they apply just as well to other social institutions and systems of belief.
So even if someone isn't, religious in the traditional sense, they might still be worshiping society in a way, by adhering to its norms and striving for its rewards.
That's the implication, and it's a pretty radical one. It suggests that even in a secular society, we haven't really escaped this dynamic of worshiping a higher power. We've just replaced the traditional deities with something else,
With what?
with the collective will, the social order, the invisible hand of the market, whatever you want to call it. It's still this powerful force, shaping our lives, even if we don't, always recognize it as such.
Okay, wow, this is really making me think. So does this mean we're all just puppets of this societal god? Like where does individual agency come in?
That's a great question, and it brings us to another key thinker, Friedrich Nietzsche.
Oh, yeah.
You might know him for his famous declaration of the death of God.
Yeah.
Now, Nietzsche wasn't literally saying that God had died. He was talking about the decline of traditional religious belief in the modern world.
Right, and he was kind of worried about what would fill that void, right?
Yeah, exactly. Nietzsche was concerned that with the death of God, we would lose our moral compass, our sense of meaning and purpose. But he also saw an opportunity.
Oh, really?
He believed that the decline of traditional religion could pave the way for a new kind of human being.
Yeah.
One who was, free to create their own values and determine their own destiny.
So he saw it as both a crisis and a potential for like liberation.
Precisely. And that's where the concept of the social contract comes in.
Ah, yes, the social contract. The thing we all supposedly signed at birth. Right? Yeah. But seriously, what does that actually mean in this context?
Well, the social contract theory, which goes back to thinkers like Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It basically says that we give up certain freedoms in exchange for the benefits of living in a society. It's like making a deal with a higher power. You surrender some autonomy, in order to gain security and stability.
Yeah.
And a sense of belonging.
So we're trading some of our individual freedom for the protection and guidance of this societal god.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
And of course, there are different, interpretations of the social contract, and not everyone agrees on its terms. But the basic idea is that there's this implicit agreement between individuals and society, where we cede some power in exchange for the benefits of collective living.
It's a pretty fascinating way to think about it. It's like we're constantly negotiating this balance between individual freedom and societal constraints.
And that's a tension that we see playing out all the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
In debates about, individual rights versus the common good, and in struggles for social justice and equality, even in our everyday choices about how we live our lives.
Wow. Okay. This is already blowing my mind.
Cool.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, right?
There's so much to unpack here.
Definitely, and that's why we're diving deep, right?
Okay. So we've got this framework of society as God. We've touched on some key philosophical ideas, but what does this all actually mean for us on a practical level? Like, why should we care about any of this?
That's the million-dollar question.
There.
And it's exactly what we'll explore when we come back after a quick break.
All right, so we're back, and my brain is already doing somersaults, just trying to wrap my head around this whole society as God thing.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, but let's try to bring it down to earth a little bit, What are the actual implications of of this idea for us, like in our everyday lives, you know?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway here is awareness. Once
Yeah.
you kind of start seeing society through this lens, you become more conscious of its influence, its subtle ways of shaping our thoughts and behaviors.
Okay.
It's like suddenly noticing the air you breathe.
Okay.
You've always been breathing, but now you're really attuned to it.
So it's not about becoming paranoid or rejecting society altogether. It's more about being a conscious participant, right?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not just these autonomous individuals making decisions in a vacuum.
Okay.
We're part of this larger system, this collective organism, you could say. And that system has a profound impact on who we are and what we do.
Cool. Wouldn't that make us all just conformists,
Yeah.
blindly following the dictates of this societal god? Like, where's the room for individuality and free will?
That's where critical thinking comes in. Just as we might question religious doctrines or political ideologies, we can also question societal norms and expectations. We can, ask ourselves, does this belief or behavior actually align with my values? Does it
Right.
does it make sense for me? Or am I just doing it because everyone else is?
Instead of just accepting these societal commandments as gospel truth, we can start to critically examine them and decide, which ones we want to follow and which ones we might want to, challenge.
Precisely. And that's where things get really exciting because that's how societies evolve.
Right?
Through the questioning and the challenging of existing norms. Think about all the social movements that have pushed for change, from civil rights to women's suffrage to LGBTQ plus equality. Those movements were all about people recognizing that certain societal commandments were unjust and needed to be rewritten.
And those changes, they didn't happen overnight, right? It,
Yeah.
it took a lot of pushing against those deeply ingrained, societal norms.
Exactly. And it highlights another important implication of this concept, the evolution of belief systems.
Mm.
Just as, religious beliefs have evolved over time, so too do societies and their godlike constructs.
Mm.
What was considered taboo or heretical a few generations ago might be completely acceptable today.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds us that society isn't this static, unchanging entity, right? It's constantly in flux, adapting to new circumstances and new ideas.
And that means that the God we're worshiping is also evolving.
Right.
Think about how much attitudes have changed, in recent decades towards things like, gender roles and family structures and even, the definition of success. Those shifts, they reflect a changing societal landscape, a reimagining of what's considered good and right.
Hmm. But if society is this powerful force, this God that shapes our values and desires, how do we ensure that it's a God worth worshiping? How do we avoid falling into the trap of blind obedience or
Yeah.
or unquestioning conformity?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that requires, constant vigilance and critical engagement. It's
Yeah.
it's about finding that balance between, the needs of the individual and the needs of the collective.
So it's not about rejecting society altogether.
Yeah.
It's about finding a way to participate in a way that feels, authentic and meaningful to us.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have both rights and responsibilities within this larger system.
Okay.
We have the right to question, to dissent, to advocate for change,
Right.
but we also have a responsibility to, engage in thoughtful dialogue, to consider the perspectives of others, and to work towards a society that benefits, all its members.
Right. It's like that old saying, think globally, act locally, but with a society as God twist,
Mhm.
Like, we need to be aware of the larger forces at play, but also recognize that our individual choices and actions can have a ripple effect on the system as a whole.
Absolutely. And that brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of this concept,
Yeah.
power. If we think of society as a god, then we have to acknowledge that it wields, immense power over our lives.
Right.
And like any form of power, it can be used for good or for ill.
So how do we ensure that this societal God doesn't become a tyrant? How do we protect ourselves from the dangers of conformity and groupthink.
That's where critical thinking and individual agency become even more important. It's about recognizing the signs of unhealthy conformity, questioning authority,
Hmm.
and being willing to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's unpopular.
But isn't that easier said than done? It takes a lot of courage to go against the grain,
Mm.
especially when you're facing social pressure or even potential repercussions.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
it's not easy, but throughout history there have always been individuals who've dared to challenge the status quo, who've spoken truth to power, who've pushed for a more just and equitable society.
Yeah, those are the people who really make a difference, who help to shape the God we live under for the better.
And that's what's so empowering about this concept.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're not just passive recipients of societal influence.
Right.
We're active participants,
Hmm.
co-creators of the world we live in,
Yeah.
and that means we have the power to shape the God we worship.
But as we've been discussing, there are definitely critiques to consider. Not everyone's on board with this whole society as God
Yeah.
idea, and for good reason.
Right. It's a complex and nuanced concept,
Hmm.
and it's important to acknowledge the potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
One common criticism is that it oversimplifies things.
Mhm.
Equating society with a god can feel reductive, like we're trying to cram a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, it's like we're losing some of the nuances and complexities of human experience by trying to, fit it into this neat little framework.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of diversity. Not all societies are created equal.
Right.
We have different cultures, different political systems, different economic structures.
Yeah.
So the God we're worshiping can look very different depending on where we live and who we are.
So what might feel oppressive or stifling in one society might feel empowering and supportive in another. It's all about context.
Absolutely. And that means we need to be careful about sweeping generalizations. What might be true about society in one place or time might not hold true in another. We need to be mindful of those differences.
And that brings us to a really important point that's been kind of lurking in the background of this whole discussion, the potential for tyranny. If we view society as a god, does that mean any form of dissent or challenge to the status quo becomes heresy?
It's a valid concern, and it highlights the importance of critical thinking and the need to constantly question the legitimacy of societal norms and structures.
Yeah.
Just because something is widely accepted doesn't necessarily mean it's right or just.
So it's not about blindly obeying the societal god. It's about engaging with it, critically and thoughtfully, right?
Exactly. And that's where individual agency and the right to dissent becomes so crucial.
Mhm.
We need to be able to challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power, to advocate for change without fear of being silenced or punished.
So it's about finding that delicate balance, between respecting the collective good and protecting individual rights and freedoms.
Precisely. And that balance is constantly being, negotiated and renegotiated within societies. It's an ongoing process, and there's no
Yeah.
there's no easy answer.
It's a lot to grapple with, but this whole concept of society as God really helps to frame those questions in a new and thought-provoking way.
It does, doesn't it? It gives us a new lens through which to view the world and our place in it. It helps us to understand these complex forces that shape our lives,
Right. Okay.
and it empowers us to take a more active role in shaping the future of our societies.
Well, I definitely need some time to digest all of this. My head is spinning.
I know, I know.
But in a good way.
It's a lot to take in for sure, but that's the beauty of a deep dive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're plumbing the depths of these ideas,
Oh,
exploring their complexities and contradictions.
and we're not done yet.
We're not.
We've still got more to uncover in this final part of our deep dive. Okay, so we're back for this final part of our deep dive into this society as God concept. And I gotta say, I'm still processing everything we've talked about.
It is a lot to take in. But that's kind of what makes it so fascinating, right?
Yeah,
It challenges us to look at the world in a whole new way.
it really does. So before we wrap things up, let's just do a quick recap just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, good idea. So we started by exploring this whole idea of society as God, not as a literal deity, but as a metaphor for the immense influence that societal structures have on our lives.
Right. It's about recognizing that society sets the rules, it shapes our values, and even kind of whispers our aspirations in our ears, often without us even realizing it.
That's right. And we talked about how this concept helps us to understand the power dynamics at play, the ways in which society can both, empower and constrain us.
We also delved into some pretty heavy philosophical territory with thinkers like Durkheim and Nietzsche.
Yeah, their work really sheds light on the complex relationship between, the individual and the collective and how that relationship has evolved over time.
And of course, we couldn't ignore the potential downsides of this whole society as God idea.
Right. We talked about the dangers of conformity, groupthink, and the potential for this God to become a tyrannical force.
But but ultimately, I think the takeaway here is one of empowerment.
Exactly, exactly. Once we understand how this societal God operates, we can start to consciously engage with it. We
Mhm.
can, we can question its rules, we can challenge its norms, and we can work towards, creating a society that aligns with our values.
It's about recognizing that we're not just, passive recipients of societal influence. We're active participants, co-creators of the world we live in.
And that brings me to a final thought that I'd like to leave you with today.
Okay, I'm all ears.
If we accept that society shapes us, in such profound ways, then we also have to acknowledge that we have the power to shape society in return.
It's like a feedback loop, right? We're
Yeah.
both products and producers of this societal God.
Precisely. Our choices, our actions, our voices, they all contribute to the evolution of this God that we live under.
Mm.
So the question becomes, what kind of God do we want to create?
Yeah, that's a powerful question to ponder, and it's one that each of us has to answer for ourselves.
Exactly. There's no easy answer, no one size fits all solution. But by engaging with this concept of society as God, we can start to have more meaningful conversations about the kind of world we want to live in and the role that we each play in creating it.
So it's not about worshiping blindly or rebelling mindlessly. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between honoring the collective and nurturing the individual.
And it's about recognizing that this is an ongoing process, a
Yes.
constant dance between conformity and dissent, tradition and innovation.
Well, I don't know about you, but this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too, me
You
too.
know.
And I hope it sparks some new ideas and perspectives for
Yeah.
for you listening as well.
As always, thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery.
And until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep shaping the God you live under.
We'll see you next time.